The U.S. presidential race heats up as Democrats prepare to formally anoint Joe Biden in the race for the White House. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. As Democrats take center stage next week to formalize their party's ticket for November's national election, gone will be the mass gathering of party faithful, giving way instead to smaller events and virtual speeches. We, of course, already know how it will end. By this time next week, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be officially their party's nominees for president and vice president. For more, we turn now to CGTN's Nathan King. He's at the White House. So, Nathan, on the eve of the Democrats' unconventional convention, what can we expect? Will we hear more about the party's policies, things like healthcare, immigration? Will we hear more?
Policies at a convention? And come on, even in a virtual world, we probably won't hear much. No, you know, it's quite incredible. I mean, I'm really going to miss conventions because they are so much fun. I've been here over 20 years covering politics, and there's nothing like it anywhere else in the world. It's a party and politics combined. There's less politics. So the big question is, in this virtual world, will we hear more policy speeches? We don't know. But what we do know is that a lot of this is going to happen virtually, at least with the Democrats in the first week. Basically, all the speeches are going to be virtual. There'll be some action in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where it was meant to be held. But the actual roll call of the states where they nominate, of course, Joe Biden to be their presidential candidate will be virtual too. It's going to be a different balancing act. I'm sure all the tech wizards, camera wizards, AI wizards, green screen people are really trying to work overtime to try and deliver the sort of same punch or similar punch that you have from these events where you have cheering crowds and balloons descending from the ceiling. It's going to be very, very different indeed. But we are going to have lots of speakers for Democrats: Bernie Sanders, Michelle Obama, a lot of the candidates that didn't make it to be vice president or president, all leading up, of course, to the nomination towards the end of the week. Now, in terms of the Republicans, the following week, we know that U.S. President Donald Trump, who will be here, it looks like, delivering some sort of speech. Now, there's been a lot of questioning about whether a sitting president can use the White House for a political nomination, but given the times we're in, COVID, he'll probably get a pass. There'll be some sort of gathering in Charlotte in terms of nominating him, but we don't exactly know the details because, of course, they actually really wanted to be in person. You know, the president wanted to go to Charlotte, and then after Charlotte said we can't accommodate it because of COVID, moved everything to Jacksonville, cancelled that in Florida because of the spread of the pandemic there. So it's a bit of a mess. It's going to be very interesting to see not just substance, but of course the style of this. I mean, it's a Zoom call convention, if you like.
Nathan, the political impasse continues between the White House and Democrats over economic aid to Americans. Now, with the help of that, we had that first aid package. Americans spent more at retail stores and restaurants last month. But evidence suggests that sales are slowing with the expiration of that first package. That's the situation in the United States. But I want to ask you about China, because they also released an economic report. That's very important. Where do things stand there?
Well, let's compare the two, shall we? Look, retail spending in the United States has actually rebounded to pre-pandemic levels. That's good news. But you're absolutely right. That was the reading, essentially, for the month before the reporting. Now that essentially a lot of the stimulus, especially that $600 a week extra that the federal government has been paying for people who have been unemployed, has gone away. There is some movement with an executive order, but it's very confusing. There is signs that that is dipping. Now, still, retail sales up 1.2%. But if you look at industrial output here in the United States, even though it's recovering, it's down over 8%, perhaps nearly 9% from this time last year. Now, contrast China. Retail spending is bouncing back, although at similar levels to, I said, for the United States. It's not there yet. But industrial production, especially manufacturing, up about 5%. If you look at high-end manufacturing, where, of course, a lot of the industrial policy for the US, for China, is dedicated, it's up nearly 10%. So it's really a view of how well and how different these two countries are recovering from COVID, although there, of course, is a bit of a lag, but China seems to have bounced back much quicker.
Thank you, Nathan. That's CGTN's Nathan King reporting from the White House. Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Frank Sesno joins us from here in Washington, D.C. He's an award-winning journalist and the former director of George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. Amy Holmes is in New York. She's a writer for HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher and a political columnist for the Swiss weekly Die Weltwoche. Also from New York, Erin Maté is the host of Pushback with Erin Maté on the Grayzone, an independent news website. And John Burnett is the managing director and founder of One Empire Group, a New York-based consulting firm. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. John Burnett, it's been a few days, 4 days to be exact, since Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris to be his running mate. They made a joint appearance in his home state of Delaware the day after that announcement. And she's been getting a lot of media attention over the past few days. What do you make of the choice?
Well, the thing is, I like the fact that he chose Kamala Harris. Why? Because, you know, when I look at my Facebook feed and other social media applications, there's a huge, huge debate in the black community over whether or not she's really good for the community. When you look at her prosecutorial record, excuse me, with respect to her being AG in California, the number of people that she locked up for minor offenses when it relating to marijuana, when you look at the wrongfully convicted, when it came down to the state paying out for the wrongful convictions, she served to block that, and so many other issues. So there's a huge divide within the black community and those who support Black Lives Matter who are not excited about Kamala Harris being on the ticket.
Amy, let me ask you about that. There's been a lot of discussion and a lot of debate over Kamala Harris's past as a prosecutor. She was district attorney in San Francisco, and then she became attorney general, of course, in the state of California. Is that going to hurt that ticket?
Well, I think John makes an excellent point that it possibly could. And Kamala Harris, if you remember, she had huge, huge media buildup when she was running in the Democratic primary that fizzled. She dropped out of the primary before Christmas. And we, discovered that African-American voters, they actually preferred Joe Biden over Kamala Harris. So that's a real Achilles heel for her. And then for conservatives, she is a huge gift that despite the mainstream media going into full marketing mode, trying to market Kamala Harris as a pragmatic moderate, as a centrist in the center of the Democratic Party, she has a long record and a long history of being quite to the left. And GovTrack, for example, rates her as more liberal than Bernie Sanders, a self-identified socialist. This is also someone who said that she would pursue mandatory buyback programs for firearms. Well,
yeah.
That's gun confiscation. Mm-hmm. So as we discussed on Monday, the Second Amendment is a huge issue for those who believe in it, who believe in gun rights. It does drive their votes. It does drive them to the polls. And Kamala Harris has a history now as a United States Senator of taking positions far to the left of the American public.
Erin Maté, that is how, of course, Kamala Harris is being portrayed by the Trump campaign as someone who's very liberal, who's on the extreme left of the party. This is what Vice President Mike Pence said about her. Let's listen to it.
We all know, look, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party have been overtaken by the radical left. So given their promises of higher taxes, open borders, socialized medicine, and abortion on demand, it's no surprise that he chose Senator Harris to be his running mate.
Erin, if you look at the policies of Joe Biden, what we do know, and of course the policies in the past of Kamala Harris, I mean, would you describe them as radical lefties?
No, I consider myself to be a radical lefty, and I don't think that either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris is in my team. But look at the example that Pence gave of socialized medicine. Joe Biden is a staunch opponent of socialized medicine, and Kamala Harris claimed to be in favor of socialized medicine when she initially co-sponsored Bernie Sanders' bill for Medicare for All. But then as the primary went on, and now that she's become Joe Biden's running mate, she's pretty much abandoned her position. So this effort by Donald Trump and Mike Pence to portray the Democratic ticket as far left is just pretty farcical, and it's not going to work. And the problem is, look, I have plenty of criticisms of both of their records when it comes to Biden and Harris, but many people will look at the alternative. You have Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and there it's just not hard to make a choice because Trump and Pence are just so far right.
Frank says, now, I mean, looking at some of the issues that are of relevance to progressive voters, I mean, we talked about Medicare, but there are other things like police violence, criminal justice reform, student debt, the tax system in the country. If Biden is going to attract these progressive voters, does he have to move pretty far left?
Well, he already has. He did it as part of the primary process and coming out of the primaries where he was victorious, and he put his arm around Bernie Sanders, and his campaign officials and Sanders' aides met and they hammered out certain things. Biden's position on student debt, for example, reflects that. Climate change reflects that. But the idea that they're going to really credibly be able to portray Biden and Harris as far left extremists is not surprising. It will work with the base because that's what they want to hear. But the fact of the matter is that this election is a referendum on Donald Trump. It will continue to be a referendum and a vote on Donald Trump. And Harris will be very adept and very tough at doing that. I take a little different position, by the way, on her position as a prosecutor and all the rest. And that actually is coming under a lot of attack by people on the left. And it's one of these things that, in a strange and kind of ironic way, almost inoculates her from these charges, because it's very hard for there to be a charge that sticks saying she's a far lefty when she served in the attorney general and prosecutor's role and has actually the criticism hanging around her from the left that she does.
But is it going to be a liability for her, Frank, with the progressives?
It may be. I mean, if you go on social media now and you look at some of the conversation that's taking place, and it's not all very nice, there's a lot of skepticism and doubt about Harris. My feeling, though, is, and having covered a lot of campaigns, ultimately this will come down to what's the choice? Where else are they going to go?
Yeah.
So they'll squawk and they'll scream and all that.
Well, hold on.
Huh?
Hold on, Frank. There is a third choice, and this is something that the Biden campaign is concerned about, and that is staying home. Not going to the polls, not going to the trouble of mailing in your ballot. And so if Kamala Harris is, creating controversy among progressives, particularly Black Lives Matter and the defund police movement, those voters might say, I don't have a choice in this election, so I'm just not going to vote.
But I just don't think that those voters are going to make the mind exclusively.
All right, just hold on.
Listening to lots of other people who are going to be on the trail too.
Let's get the view of a progressive on this panel. Erin Maté, would you be voting?
I'm Canadian, so I can't vote, but if I could vote, certainly I would vote to defeat Donald Trump. I personally have nothing positive to say about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, but I have a lot worse to say about Donald Trump and Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo and everybody else in their administration. So for that purpose, to stop what I think would be a far worse outcome, I absolutely would advocate voting for Joe Biden, especially if you're in a swing state.
Okay, John Burnett, you wanted to say something?
Again, we're going to hear that again and again.
Well, if you actually walk the streets of Minnesota, go to Portland, go to Seattle. In fact, there was a report that came out today that Black Lives Matter and other groups are actually calling for white people to give up their homes in Seattle. This has actually gone to a state of madness. When you combine that with defund the police, there is going to be ultimate fear in certain demographics to say, wait a second, while we're may not be excited over President Trump, I'm talking about the middle and some moderate Democrats, there's no way that we can actually vote for a ticket as far as Biden and Kamala Harris that actually is calling for defunding of the police, calling for all these radical ideas.
But they're not calling for that. They're not calling for that.
No, let's not fool ourselves. They are going to be pulled to the left. Because if they don't go to the far left, these individuals that are still protesting will hit the streets and protest, and they will not go to the polls.
That's not how it works.
Let's not kid ourselves.
Go ahead, Frank.
That's not how it works. Candidates go to the sides, the left or the right, during the primary process, and they come back to the middle during the general election, and that's where they govern from. And that's what will happen here.
Okay.
Well, the question is, can Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, legitimately do that at this point in the campaign? And then there's another problem for the Biden-Harris ticket. Hillary Clinton underperformed in every demographic in 2016, down from Obama's performance in 2012. And so Biden and Harris, they have to get those voters back. They have to pull in between 6.7 and 9.2 million voters who voted for Obama in 2012 flipped their vote for Donald Trump. Larry Sabato at the University of Virginia has found about that range. Biden, Harris, they need to bring those voters home, and they have a difficult task there because they have to both appeal to their progressive base, but also to those suburban families who don't want to see what's happening in Portland happen in their city.
Okay, Amy, you know,
if I could just quickly add to that point, there are Democratic strategists that are sending out messaging saying, you know what, you may not be excited by Biden and Harris, but swallow the pill and get over it because we have no other option. That is not an inspiring message.
All right, Amy, you know, just a day after Joe Biden made that announcement, there was, of course, that joint appearance in Delaware, and Kamala Harris spoke there. This is what she had to say. Let's listen.
The president's mismanagement of the pandemic has plunged us into the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. And we're experiencing a moral reckoning with racism and systemic injustice that has brought a new coalition of conscience to the streets of our country, demanding change. America is crying out for leadership. And let me tell you, as somebody who has presented my fair share of arguments in court, the case against Donald Trump and Mike Pence is open and shut.
So, Amy, of course, as a prosecutor, she's framing this as some kind of a court case against Trump and Pence. What do you make of that approach? I mean, will she be an effective advocate for that campaign?
Well, they have to appeal to those swing voters, those undecided voters. A huge percentage of voters don't decide until literally a week before Election Day. So for them, the case is not shut. It is not case closed, and they want to hear from Biden and Harris in terms of what their agenda and their plan is for the country. But I would also add, and I'm sure Frank knows a lot about this, that there's a lot of political science that shows most people don't actually cast a protest vote, as much as you might want to say, you know, keep Trump out of the office, cast your vote for Biden and Harris just to keep Trump out. That's typically not what motivates people to go to the polls and vote for your candidate.
Although there has been a Pew poll which shows that 56% of people who were asked why they would vote for Joe Biden said they would vote for him because he's not Trump.
They may say that, but when it comes to Election Day, will they go to the actual effort to do that? In that poll, I would want to know, were those registered voters? Were those likely voters? You know, was that just of all American adults? All of that makes a big difference. But for, you know, Kamala Harris in her remarks, I thought it was interesting and notable. They are trying to attack Trump on the economy, because that's the one area where Trump still outpolls Biden, is in handling of the economy.
John Burnett, very quickly, I want to go through some of the polling. President Trump has been taking a hammering in the polling. In fact, the latest NPR-PBS Marist poll shows Biden with a double-digit lead. That's 53 to 42. Some of the issues that the president is having problems with is handling of the pandemic, and there's also been a poll done on race relations, and he's losing in that as well. Can he recover from these?
Absolutely. When you compare these poll numbers to 2016, Hillary was up even higher, and we all know how that turned out. But you know what? I got information on another poll. They asked people who would they vote for, and some people said Biden, some people said Trump. But both of those answers, they said the majority of their neighbors are actually voting for Trump. Or they think that they will be pulling the lever or filling in the bubble for Trump. So that says a lot. There's an untapped silent majority out there that's not being captured in the polls.
But if I can say this, I mean, take the emotion out of this and all the hyperbole around all these candidates and just look at the record. Donald Trump has never been above 50% approval in his entire time in office. We haven't seen that with other presidents who have run for re-election. Typically, and this is when George Herbert Walker Bush lost his re-election, voters hang on the economy 3 to 6 months before the election. The economy is, by any stretch of the imagination, a very difficult place. Unprecedented experience is COVID. Every single American is experiencing COVID. And there are polls where they overwhelmingly feel that Donald Trump is handling it poorly, and they favor face masks, and some of the most divisive things in sort of the political ecosystem are not so divisive. There's a lot of public support around them, though they remain polarizing in the public. So by historical standards and by looking at the numbers over time, Donald Trump is in really tough shape, and his campaign knows it.
Okay, Erin, as Frank says, you know, I think the defining issue of this election will be, the dominant question will be the pandemic and Donald Trump's handling of that pandemic. Joe Biden has been talking about it. He's been talking about some of his prescriptions for what he would do if he became president. Let's listen to what he said.
Every single American should be wearing a mask when they're outside for the next 3 months at a minimum. Every governor should mandate mandatory mask wearing. The estimates by the experts are it will save over 40,000 lives in the next 3 months. 40,000 lives. The people act responsibly. And it's not about your rights, it's about your responsibilities as an American.
So, listening to Joe Biden there, I mean, would voters look at this, listen to this, and say, you know, this is a man I trust, this is a man who's going to save us, this is a man who's going to get us out of this pandemic crisis that we're facing right now?
Yeah, I think it's not hard to think that when Trump has, in my opinion, handled this very poorly. It's not entirely his fault. I think some of this has to do with just the fundamental systemic flaws in the U.S. system, with doesn't guarantee health care for everybody, poor federal coordination overall, and infrastructure. But look, Trump is the one who downplayed this virus. He told everyone it would magically go away one day. He talked about injecting bleach as a panacea. His administration was warned about this by China in early January, so pretty early on. It did not prepare properly. Now, there are governors, including Governor Cuomo in New York, for example, who's a Democrat, who also have handled this poorly. So it's not just Trump's fault, but ultimately, he is the president. The buck does stop with him. And for people looking for someone to blame, it's easy to hold Trump responsible just because he's been so all over the map with his rhetoric. And contrast that to Joe Biden, who has not been in office during this. I think it's not going to be difficult for some people to associate him with a more stable response to the pandemic, given what they've experienced under Donald Trump.
Frank, the president has responded to what Joe Biden has said, but he did distort what former Vice President Biden said. He said, that Joe Biden had called for a federal mandate. Joe Biden didn't call for that. This is what he said. Let's listen.
Today we saw Joe Biden continue to politicize a pandemic and to show his appalling lack of respect for the American people. That's what it is. At every turn, Biden has been wrong about the virus, ignoring the scientific evidence and putting left-wing politics before facts and evidence. He wants the federal government to issue a sweeping new mandate to law-abiding citizens. He wants the President of the United States, with the mere stroke of a pen, to order over 300 million American citizens to wear a mask for a minimum of 3 straight months. I guess this just happened. He thinks it's good politics, I guess.
So, Frank, how do you contrast these two approaches? Because this is going to be one of the key issues, if not the key issue, in the upcoming election.
Well, since Donald Trump has never been constrained by either the science or the truth with respect to this virus, it's easy for him to mischaracterize Biden, and he'll continue to do it. I'm not saying Biden's perfect, hardly that. But what you just heard Biden say was he calls on the governors to mandate it. He never said, I'm going to mandate it, and that's what Trump takes and runs with it. That's what this campaign is going to be about. But what I think both candidates are going to be doing is trying very hard to assert to the voters, Trump, I'm in charge. I'm the guy who's going to get you through this. I'm going to get the economy back. Look what I did before this happened. I think he's going to have a really hard time with that. Biden's going to say, I'm not Trump. I'm the steady hand. I'm going to be the grown-up in the room. As I said earlier, re-elections are referenda on the incumbent, and that's what the voters are going to be tasked with here. I really think that's what it's going to come down to.
Amy, there's one other issue that's been getting a lot of attention this week, and this was sparked off by a conservative writer. He wrote an op-ed piece in Newsweek magazine in which he said that Kamala Harris may not meet the qualifications to be nominee for vice president. President Trump, at one of his White House news conferences, was asked about this, and this is what he said.
So I just heard that. I heard it today, that she doesn't meet the requirements. And by the way, the lawyer that wrote that piece is a very highly qualified, very talented lawyer. I have no idea if that's right. I would have assumed the Democrats would have checked that out before she gets chosen to run for vice president.
Now, Amy, some have called this racist. It's a birther issue. What do you make of it? Why did this come up now?
I think it's a red herring, and it would be a big mistake for Republicans to mix my metaphors, to go down that rabbit hole. And we know that Trump's birtherism accusations against President Obama, they didn't work. Senator Obama was then voted president twice. But I would point out to our audience and to our fellow panelists that I know very well the lawyer on the John McCain campaign who had to beat back efforts by Democrats to lodge their own birther conspiracies against John McCain, because John McCain was born on a Navy base in Panama. And this lawyer, he was required to interview John McCain's mother, go through all of the records. So birtherism has actually popped up on the other side in a previous election, but I don't think that it's a winner as an issue for Republicans. But I would like to add one last thing about when we're discussing polling data and even COVID-19 and the approach to this. A lot of it has to do with who you ask. And we know from 2016 that national polls are not the polls to be looking at. We should be looking at state by state and even county by county. Donald Trump lost the popular vote, but he won the electoral map. And I would imagine that the Biden-Harris campaign are paying much closer attention to that than the Hillary Clinton campaign did. But when Biden said that wearing masks is not about your rights, it's about your responsibility, that really depends, you know, the point of view on that really depends on where you are and who you ask. If you're here in New York City, yes, people want to wear masks because we're in close contact with each other. But if you're in a county outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, that message might not go down so well with you.
Erin, very quickly, there's another debate going on, a very robust debate about funding for the post office. And that's important because a lot of people are going to be voting by mail. The president's holding back on funding. What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, I hope the post office prevails. There's been long-time efforts to privatize the post office. Donald Trump has escalated those attacks. The Postal Service Union just endorsed Joe Biden. And it's obvious why Trump wants to sabotage them, because he thinks mail-in voting could threaten his election chances. So I'm hoping that he does not prevail.
Okay. And we have to leave it there. Thanks to everybody for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.